What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. One thing I want to say really quick is I apologize, guys. I didn't get to do The Last of Us episode 4 as quickly as I normally do my reviews because I've just been so inundated with Hogwarts Legacy and the streams that I've been doing every single day. You guys have been enjoying it. I've been enjoying the game, so I took some time away from my TV show reviews. I did Velma because I wanted to finish it and get it over with, but The Last of Us unfortunately took a back burner. But we're here now. We're going to do episode 4 of The Last of Us. But before we do, of course, the only two things I'm going to ask of you is to give me a like on this video and consider blessing me with a long view duration because that helps me fight the YouTube algorithm, guys. We almost got a 20-minute view duration on my last couple of reviews. That's extremely high, and that helps them push them out into the algorithm. So if you guys can continue to do that, I would really appreciate that. Now, with that being said, let's jump right in to episode 4 review for The Last of Us. All right, so the episode starts off with Ellie looking at her weapon that she got in the last episode after the whole Bill and Frank big gay farm thing. Now, again, I gave that last episode a 5 out of 10 because I feel like it really didn't do anything for the story. Some people disagreed with me, a lot of people agreed with me, but at the end of the day, you're more than happy to have your own opinion about the show. I feel like that episode definitely does better when you think of it in a vacuum sense all by itself, but when you start adding it into the canon story and you start adding it into the progressive path of The Last of Us as a TV show, then it starts to falter because I feel like between episode 2 and 4, there was no reason for that to exist. Like, I can look at this episode right now, not think of episode 3 and be perfectly fine. Like, that's the problem. Like, I feel like you shouldn't be okay with missing an episode because from episode 2 and 1, I couldn't have watched episode 2 without watching 1. That's how I felt. And with episode 3 going into 4, I don't feel that way. So that's why I gave it a 5 out of 10. But this episode was a hell of a lot better, and we're going to get into it and explain why. So Ellie ends up looking at the gun again, and Ellie seems to be having these little bits of like power trips. She feels like she's having more power in her hands, and I don't necessarily think it's a power trip. I just think it's from the viewpoint of someone who's not used to having any power. Obviously, Ellie is a very young girl. She's very tiny. She doesn't have much physical strength. So when she has a weapon in her hand, she feels some type of way. She feels like she has more power. She feels like she could contribute more, and I think that's why they showed the scene in the last episode of Ellie stabbing the infected in the head, even though she really didn't have to. There was no reason to do it. The infected was literally buried under rocks. It was never going to get out. It was never going to do anything. It was just going to stay there. But she still stabbed it in the head, and she smiled afterwards. And in this scenario, she's doing the same thing with the gun. She loads the gun after looking at the bullet, and she smirks looking at herself in the mirror with the gun, and she's feeling powerful. That's basically what it is. She's feeling powerful because she doesn't have power every day. So then we fast forward, and she ends up going outside where Joel is siphoning gas from one of the ruined cars because they need gas for their truck. She ends up asking him a question about how do you siphon gas and what is the process, and he tries to explain it, but he ends up tumbling and failing, and she makes fun of him and says that you really don't know what you're talking about, do you? And he quips back and says that he knows exactly what he's doing, and that's all that matters. So she ends up trying to tell him a joke from a book that she got, and he doesn't laugh at the joke at all, basically calls her stupid. And then we have a scene that comes out from the actual video game when they're in the truck. It's not a perfect side-by-side shot, but it's damn near close, and I appreciate it coming from the game. I can really appreciate when I see scenes like this, when they're driving off and they're showing how destroyed the world actually is, how nature has completely taken back the world when they drive by a bunch of buffalo. I think it's just really impressive to see all of this, and I appreciate how well the sets are made, even though I think it's really tough, to be honest with you. I think it's tough for them to make good sets with this IP because The Last of Us is in a post-apocalyptic world. It's not exactly very colorful. It's very dull, very green, very gray, very bland, and they still find a way to make it interesting to look at. So I can appreciate that much. She ends up finding a gay porno magazine, obviously from Bill and Frank, because that was their truck, and she throws it out the window after questioning why it has sticky stuff in between the pages. And then after they fast forward, they go into this forest where they think they're going to be safe, and Joel ends up parking the car, and they plan to have an evening together where they can rest in relative safety. They end up sharing food, which happens to be 20-year-old Chef Boyardee, which is unbelievably nasty to me, but obviously in a post-apocalyptic world, you would eat anything you can, and Chef Boyardee is probably one of those things that they would have to eat because, I mean, they do last forever. It's canned food. Not actually forever, but you get my point. So they decide they want to go to sleep because they need to get to Wyoming in the morning, and as they lay down, Ellie starts to read her book, and she looks over to Joel and asks him a question about whether or not they are actually safe in the woods and whether or not the people that he said were dangerous were actually going to find them in the woods. He says they're going to be perfectly fine. They'll be safe, and they end up going to bed, but he still has his weapon locked and loaded by the end of it all anyway, and ends up waking up and to watch them because now Ellie has made him second guess their safety, which I guess is a good thing. You really shouldn't let yourself have your guard down. But he questions the safety, ends up waking up and stands watch so Ellie can sleep. Fast forward in the morning, Ellie has slept and Joel is loading the truck and they leave the forest to go further into the city. They're following the map and Ellie ends up asking Joel about his past with his brother, and he ends up explaining that his brother joined the military to become a hero. That's what he has, these like illusions of grandeur to become a hero. I'm gonna show you exactly what he says. Check this out.
Tommy's what we used to call a joiner. Dreams of becoming a hero. So he enlists in the army right out of high school. A few months later, they ship him off to Desert Storm.
You guys obviously know what happened in Desert Storm. So he goes into the story and basically says that he leaves the military. It wasn't for him. And he ends up getting convinced to go up to Boston after the whole infection breaks out. And that's where they end up meeting Tess. Check this out.
Cut to 12 years later, outbreak happens. He convinces me to join a group making their way up to Boston, which I did. Mostly to keep an eye on him, keep him alive. That's where we met Tess.
So that gives you a little backstory on how the original group all met during the actual outbreak. But then he explains how Tommy met Marlene, who was the leader of the Fireflies, and it's equivalent to Tommy joining the military all over again and not learning from his mistakes. Check this out.
She talks me to joining the Fireflies. The same mistake he made when he was 18. Wants to save the world.
So after saying that Tommy wants to save the world, Ellie looks at Joel and asks him, isn't the world worth saving? Shouldn't you at least try? And Joel says that she hasn't seen the world yet, and that's why she doesn't understand. Check this out.
You haven't seen the world, so you don't know.
Then he says something that really hurts Ellie about Ellie basically not being family. I don't know why she would think she was family at this point in time, but this is what he says to Ellie. And it's pretty strong.
Keep going for family. That's about it.
I'm not family.
No. You're cargo. But I made a promise to Tess. And she was like family.
So that's a pretty damn strong statement. He basically tells her that she's cargo, she's not family, and the only reason why he's carrying her around is because he made a promise to someone who actually was family. Now again, this is why I feel like episode 3 didn't mean anything, because at that point, when Tess sacrificed herself to protect Joel and Ellie and to convince Joel that he needs to take Ellie, that Ellie's the real deal, that's all the convincing that he needed to go on his journey. He didn't need any more convincing. So when people say that the letter from Bill and Frank was the whole reason why Joel is now protecting Ellie, it's bullshit. Could you say that it might have reinforced it? Yeah, maybe. But it wasn't necessary to continue the story because he already had all the vindication needed to go protect Ellie and take her to her destination. And it's because of Tess. So I feel like Tess got short-sighted by the last episode, episode 3. Everybody forgets exactly what Tess did and the reason why she did it and how Joel reacted to it. All because you had this big gay romance in the 3rd episode and everybody's focusing on that and they don't realize that it actually does nothing for the story. But I digress. That's not what this review is about. I'm not going to talk about episode 3 again. So we fast forward. Ellie obviously gets a little bit insulted and then she ends up falling asleep in the truck, but they finally get to the end of the highway because there is a massive truck blocking the entrance to the underpass. So they decide to want to go around and they end up going into the city. But when they go into the city, they don't necessarily want to be there and they try to escape as fast as possible until they end up hearing a man screaming in front of what used to be a QZ for Fedra. Check this out.
Is that the QZ? Where the fuck is Fedra?
Hey! Please help!
So obviously the QZ has been completely destroyed and Fedra is no longer there. That's one big revelation. Number 2, anybody who's played the video game already knows that when you have a random dude who supposedly is hurt running around a huge town with nobody else around him screaming for help, you already know what's about to happen. You're about to get jumped because that's exactly what happens in the game. Check this out.
Put your seatbelt on.
Are we gonna help him?
No.
So Joel and Ellie end up getting jumped, and they end up trying to escape, but they crash into a building, and then what ensues is kind of like a combat scene that looks like it's straight out of the video game. They do a lot of duck and cover type animation fighting, which I can appreciate because it makes you feel like it's the game again. There's a hole in the wall that only Ellie can fit through, so Joel says to Ellie to go run into that hole when he gives the signal and hide there until he says it's safe to come out. Once Ellie actually runs into that hole, Joel shoots one guy and takes him out. Check it out. So after that guy goes down, the other guy tries to rescue that dude, and then in turn ends up getting shot. Check this out. So for everybody who's been saying that Joel is not a badass in this TV show, I've always disagreed from the first episode. And this episode, especially this scene that's about to come up, is going to solidify just how fucking badass Joel is. So as we fast forward, Joel obviously thinks he's safe. He killed two guys, but then he ends up getting jumped from behind by a kid. Check this out. The kid ends up getting the upper hand on Joel, and Ellie has no choice but to come out and use the gun that Joel has no idea that she has to save Joel. Check this out. So she takes one literal shot, and the kid goes down, but he's not quite dead yet. Joel ends up looking at Ellie in complete shock because he doesn't realize that she had a gun this entire time. And he's mad at her, but at the same time, he's also thankful because she saved his life. Now, the kid starts begging for his life, and this is when it gets really, really crazy. And I'm glad that they showed the brutality of this by having the kid beg for his life, and he even calls for his mom before Joel is basically forced to kill him. Because when Joel looks at Ellie, he takes the gun, puts it in his back pocket, and then tells her to get behind the wall because he takes out his knife, and he's not going to waste a bullet to kill this kid. He knows he has to kill this kid. He cannot let there be any witnesses. And she obviously is very scared by that and scared of the monster that Joel is. But that's because he has to be a monster in order to protect her. And then, I mean, again, the brutality of it is fantastic. Listen to this.
Don't have to. I'm sorry. No, we can just stop. Mom!
It's a brutal scene. And it's something that I can appreciate that they actually put into this TV show, that they're not pulling any punches. They showed the brutality of Joel. They made the kid beg for his life. It's one of those things where it's like, that's good. That's good TV. That makes you very interested in the future of what's going to happen. So Joel ends up going back to Ellie. They have a little conversation about what happened, and then they try to end up escaping, only to realize that they're being surrounded by kind of like military-esque people who are looking for the people who they just killed because they heard gunshots and whatnot. Then we fast forward and we see the scene of a woman interviewing what seems to be a doctor. And this woman is looking for a few people, two of which is Henry and Sam, who she can't stop mentioning. The doctor says that he has no idea where these people are, and she's not believing it. And we get a little backstory about the fact that her brother was beaten and killed in this containment center when Fendra was actually in charge. So we basically get this understanding that this woman and her military people overthrew Fedra in the QZ, and now they own the entire area. So this is their area. She threatens the guy with a gun, but the guy knows that she's not going to shoot him and calls her bluff, and she doesn't shoot him. She goes outside and tries to ramp up her dudes after she realizes that the three guys have been murdered. They don't realize that they've been murdered by Joel and Ellie. They think that the three guys were murdered by Henry and Sam because they have this desperate need to try to get Henry and Sam for whatever reason. They don't necessarily explain who Henry and Sam is just yet, but obviously they must have been either part of the group prior or they just are people who are in the area as well who they want to get. But if they know them by name, chances are they were a part of the group prior. So the woman ends up getting pissed because she realizes, or at least she thinks in her mind, that the doctor is 100% lying to her. So she goes back, walks into that containment, and decides to say, you know what? Screw it. I don't need you. Without word, without anything. Again, brutal show. Brutal episode. I love it. Without word, she just walks in, shoots him, kills him. You hear his body fall to the ground. That's basically it. She goes back outside, talks to the men surrounding her, and says that they need to go out, find Henry and Sam, and kill them no matter what. And obviously they go out and they do so. I do think it's pretty funny that all these militarized men are taking orders from a woman in a post-apocalyptic world. But again, I understand Neil Druckmann likes his girl bosses, so it is what it is. I'm not even going to bother complaining about that. Then you see the military vehicles driving around looking for Henry and Sam, and Joel and Ellie are hiding out in some sort of like building, store, cafe, whatever this used to be. And Joel ends up having a conversation with Ellie about how he's sorry that she had to do what she did. Ask her if she's all right. She asks if he's all right. And they have this little bit of a moment where they obviously get a little bit closer. Then Joel ends up finding out that Ellie, this is not the first time Ellie has had to do this. And then he feels even more sorry for her and ends up agreeing to give her back her pistol and teach her how to properly use it. Because at this point in time, Joel has realized and figured out that there's no way that they're going to be able to survive on their own unless they are both armed, equipped, and ready to go. Joel's unable to do it all by himself. So they share a little bit of a father-daughter moment where he really teaches her how to use it, how to hold it, because she's been doing it wrong. And she says thank you, and they continue forward. We see the military group looking again inside of a building, and they end up finding this room. Now, when they go upstairs into the attic of this room, they see a bunch of child drawings, a bunch of food on the floor, and they realize that someone was just recently there. Now, you could tell by the pictures in the drawings that obviously is not Joel and Ellie. They obviously found the hideout of Sam and Henry. So realizing that they're hot on their tail, they decide to ramp it up a bit and say that they're very close to finding them. But then he wants to show her something else. They go into this electrical building, and when they go into the building, they realize the ground is completely torn up and pulsating, and that's for obvious reasons. Check this out. So they end up running away, and the guy is told by the woman not to say anything about that big, spot. The reason why is because obviously that big thing is going to be a bloater. That's a bloater that's under the floor that's going to eventually escape and cause hell for these people, I'm sure. But she doesn't want to scare anybody, so she wants to keep it a secret. Then we fast forward, and now we have Joel and Ellie sneaking into a building, a massive apartment building, where they're going as high as they possibly can to go into some random apartment, because that's going to be the safest bet for them. If they go into some random apartment all the way at the top of the building, there's a better chance of them surviving throughout the night and being able to sleep. So when they go into the room, Joel ends up putting glass by the door in order to be able to hear anybody sneaking up on them through the door. Ellie ends up realizing that that's what he's doing. They all go to sleep, but before they go to sleep, Ellie asks a question about Joel's hearing and realizes that Joel is actually hard of hearing in one side of his ear. And that's the right side of his ear. His left side of his ear, he's able to hear from perfectly fine. So he leans over and talks to her a bit about it and about how killing doesn't get any easier, and then goes back to the right side of his ear so that he can hear from his left, which is his good ear. She ends up telling him a joke where they share a funny moment because they both are starting to get to know each other. And then at night, when it goes to black, it goes into the daytime, and now you realize that Joel, unfortunately, while sleeping, has turned over to the side where he can't actually hear anything. It's a small detail, but it's an important detail. Him turning over to his side where he can't actually hear anything now allows Henry and Sam to sneak up on them, because that's actually what happens. They see Henry and Sam holding them at gunpoint. They tell him to be quiet, and the episode ends like that. So overall, guys, this episode was very solid, very brutal. I can appreciate just how rough it actually was. I like the fact that they had the balls to show certain aspects that I didn't think, like most TV shows tend to pull their punches like that. This TV show didn't do that. They went full throttle, and I appreciate that. So with that being said, the episode for Last of Us number 4 gets a solid 8.5 out of 10. I think this episode was fantastic. It finally brought us back to where we were in episode 2. Again, episode 3 for me served absolutely no purpose to the story, and now we're getting more progression in the story, which could have happened with or without episode 3. The sets are fantastic, even though they have a lot of hard IP work to deal with in terms of like dull sets. Dull sets are just, that's The Last of Us. It's a dull environment. There's no lights, no nothing. It's not something that's meant to look pretty aside from maybe from a nature aspect. But other than that, it's a destroyed world that's meant to look dingy and dull, and they definitely pull it off. On top of that, I like the relationship between Joel and Ellie as it continues to progress, and I like the brutality that Joel is starting to exhibit, and I think overall it's going in the right direction. So anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you did enjoy it, and if you did, consider leaving me a subscribe. I would greatly appreciate it. Don't forget to like the video, comment, let me know what you thought, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Hypnotic out.